Next, it's been more than a quarter of a century since the role of Mayor of London was first established. First came Ken. Then came Boris. There he is. And now we have Sir Sadiq. But does the Mayor have enough power? And does the London Assembly have enough power to hold the Mayor to account? A new report from the Restate think tank, which focuses on public services, was published this week, and it's calling for a rethink of the system. They want a beefed-up role for Sadiq Khan and whoever comes next, as well as a reduction in the number of London's borough councils. Well, Charlotte Pickles is the director of Restate, and she joins us now. Hi, Charlotte. Good to see you. Great to have you on the programme. So you're calling for more powers for the Mayor. Why?
So I want to be very clear. We're calling more powers for the Mayor, but also a much stronger accountability model in the London Assembly. So this is not just let the Mayor get on with whatever he wants or in future she wants. It's about saying London is a global city. You know, it is the engine of UK PLC. You know, it's where the majority of our growth at the moment comes from. And yet the governance model we have for London is so underpowered, it's not fit for purpose. So if you think about other global cities, so let's take Tokyo or Paris or New York or Berlin, which many of your viewers will have visited or be aware of, the mayors or equivalents in those cities have far more power.
So specifically what?
So, for example, let's talk about the ability to raise money, so what we would technically call fiscal devolution, but the ability to raise taxes or raise revenue in your city. So in Tokyo, in Berlin, in Paris, in New York, those mayors can raise money for projects.
What?
So it could be a particular tax. They get to keep a lot more of the tax that is raised from their residents. So in this country, the mayor gets almost 70% of his money, or London, sorry, gets 70% of the money from central government, who then dictates essentially what you do with it. In those other global cities, they can retain more of the money that's raised, whether that's equivalent of income tax or whatever it might look like. If you take powers around health services, if you take Berlin or you take Tokyo, they have much more power to be able to decide about health services, policing. I could go on.
Yeah.
London is so far behind.
People might be alarmed to think that the Mayor could have the power to tax them more. Is that necessarily a good thing?
So I think it's not necessarily about taxing them the more. You know, that's always what we default to when we talk about finances. It's about having much more control about the money that is raised from Londoners. So one example is income tax. So we're all paying that in London. I live in London. I pay my income tax. My income tax doesn't go to the Mayor or to London. It goes straight to Whitehall and to the bureaucrats that sit in Whitehall. If the Mayor could keep just a portion, even something like 2% of that income tax that's raised, then they could, I mean, Londoners can decide because they choose their mayor, how that money is being spent. That money can be injected into projects that could make London better, could, you know, reignite growth, could make more of our lives.
Your title of this report is Capital at Risk.
Yes.
A bit of a play on words there. Is the starting point for you that London is failing? As you said, we are the engine of the UK economy.
It's definitely not that we're failing, it's that we're not reaching our potential.
Right.
So if you think about big infrastructure projects, if you think about house building, which London has got a terrible record on right now, the Mayor is hamstrung by a model where lots of boroughs can decide they don't want it, where you get, let's, you know, be honest, quite a lot of NIMBYism, and, you know, we get planning blocked, etc. These are things which stop the growth potential of London. They're things that means that people can't afford to buy housing in London. Young people have to move out, you know, all these kind of things. So it's not that it's failing, it's that it's not doing as much as it can.
So you talked about more powers, you mentioned accountability.
Yeah.
What more should there look like in terms of holding the Mayor to account? Because often we have Assembly members on the programme who say that he isn't held to account enough.
Yeah, and that's interesting that the Assembly members, which is the body that's supposed to be able to hold the Mayor to account, are saying that to you. And that's because the London Assembly, as it's constructed at the moment, it is more of a talking shop. It doesn't really have powers to do anything. So what we're saying is, you mentioned at the start, we want to see far few boroughs. If we could reduce the number of boroughs, we would scrap the constituency members of the Assembly, and we would say those leaders of those boroughs should be on the Assembly so that they are then holding to account the Mayor. We think there should be much more formal mechanisms for the Assembly to be able to scrutinise the Mayor. So there should be much more formal things like we've called for an opposition leader. We think there should be opposition measures and debates. The way to think about it, I think, is, look, London is a global city, 9 to 10 million people in it. it should look much more like Scotland or Wales and the devolved models there.
A lot of our viewers might be surprised that those checks and balances aren't already in place. Gareth, you're the Shadow Minister for London. What's your view on whether we should have more powers for the Mayor and more checks and balances?
OK, so I'm also somebody who was a councillor for 23 years in London Borough and 13 years on the London Assembly, including as a list member and then as a constituency member. So some of what's in here I quite like. Some of it I'm not so keen on, but I think that it's a very useful addition to the debate. So I completely agree with Charlotte's assertion that we need to have much more accountability at City Hall. The mechanisms exist to provide it, except for teeth. So the Assembly has summonsing power over the Mayor and anybody who's a part of the GLA family. They can summons them to a debate, to a scrutiny hearing. Effectively, there is a leader of the opposition. It's the leader of the largest opposition party. That was me for 4 years before I became a Member of Parliament. They don't use the title, but effectively that...
Did you feel like you had the power to hold the Mayor to account?
To a degree. So the biggest way you can do that is at Mayor's Question Time, but that depends on how good you are or not at doing that.
Would you say you were good?
It's not for me to say. I thought I did OK. But look, the point is, though, that the one big power that the Assembly allegedly has is that the Assembly can veto and impose their own version of the budget and mayoral strategies. But that requires a two-thirds majority, and the electoral system that puts the Assembly members there, the 25 Assembly members, would require 17 to vote for that. And that's never been possible because there's always going to be at least 8 members of the Mayor's party who won't go against what the Mayor. So it's a power in name only, it's not a power. And I would, one of the first things you could do is reduce that. Either make it a simple majority or reduce it to another number. And then the Mayor would have to pay heed to what the Assembly...
Margaret, should there be more accountability, more checks and balances of the Mayor of whichever party?
No, I don't believe that. Again, I was a councillor for 15 years in Barking and Dagenham, and I think the accountability with the leadership model in the boroughs is what the public actually want. And I think, to go down this road, I don't see any appetite for it.
Charlotte?
So I don't think that's correct, actually. So if you look at how people identify their relationships in London and their affinities, if you like, actually, on the whole, we think of ourselves as either Londoners or a much more kind of hyper-local, so that, literally the town or the area you live in London. People don't think of the boroughs. Most people have no idea who their local councillors are. There's lots of evidence of this.
So you get a parking ticket.
And then they're probably still not going to their local councillor. They're furious with probably the London Mayor in that scenario because that's the only person they've heard of. So actually, I don't think that's right. And the idea that we would want a powerful Mayor that doesn't have the right checks and balances, because the London Mayor is spending billions of taxpayers' money. They are making decisions that affect millions of people's lives. We absolutely need both a Mayor that can get on with things, can drive progress, but also the checks and balances that make sure those decisions are good decisions.
So a long list of suggestions, some of which Gareth and Margaret agree with, others they don't.
I'll take that.
What is the likelihood of any of this being taken up? What would it take to affect the kind of changes you're talking about?
So there's as we know, there's a huge debate going on about devolution in general in this country. We're one of the most centralised countries in the world. It is crazy how little local areas can make decisions themselves and spend their money. The problem with London is that it's fallen behind in that debate. So we hear loads about Greater Manchester or West Midlands. London has slightly been ignored in this, but we're starting to see people talking about it more, precisely because London is that engine of growth. And that's why I think, actually, whether it's exactly the proposals that we've put forward or, as Gareth has said, maybe there's some tweaks on that, I really do think we will see in the next few years the burning platform that requires us to do something much more.
OK, really interesting, Charlotte. Thanks very much for coming in to tell us more about the report. Thank you.